So you have a child who has brilliant ideas, who can tell you a story that keeps you completely captivated, who understands everything, participates in every discussion, and clearly has something to say, and who hands in a written assignment that looks like it was produced by someone who didn't try at all. The ideas aren't there. The sentences are short and incomplete. Spelling is illegible and inconsistent, and the handwriting is barely legible. And the child who you know is capable looks at you and says, I don't know what happened. They're not lying. Something is happening between the brain and the page, and it has a name.
Welcome to Little Minds, Big Questions, the podcast about pediatric neuropsychology for parents, teachers, and teens who want real answers about how kids' brains work. I'm Dr. Judy Ho.
And I'm Dr. Grace Mucci. And today we're talking about writing disorders, what they actually are, why writing is one of the most cognitively demanding things we ask children and adults for that matter to do, and what support looks like when the brain struggles to get thoughts onto the page.
Okay, Dr. Grace, let's get into it.
All right. So before we get into the science, here's something that reframes the entire conversation. Writing is not one skill, it's simultaneous coordination of at least 6 different cognitive processes in the brain: fine motor control, orthographic memory, phonological processing, working memory, language formulation, and executive function. So every time a child picks up a pen or sits at a keyboard to write, they use each of those processes. And when we understand that, it stops being a mystery why so many people struggle, so many children struggle. The mystery is that more of them don't.
That's a lot of skills that you have to recruit all at the same time. It
Mhm.
sounds
It is.
exhausting, actually. So you're right. It is baffling in some ways why more people don't actually struggle with this. But let's go back to the basics because I think writing disorders are probably the least understood of the learning disorders. I think some people don't even know that it exists. And obviously, if you're not a professional, this may even be the first time you're hearing it. So, what are we actually talking about when we say a child has a writing disorder?
Dr. Judy, writing disorders fall under the DSM, which is a Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Psychiatric Disorders. The DSM category is specific learning disorder with impairment in written expression. But within that umbrella, there really are 3 distinct profiles that look very different from each other and need different evaluation and support. So the first is dysgraphia, which is primarily a problem with the physical act of writing. Okay. The second is a disorder of written expression, where the mechanics might be intact, but the ability to organize and compose text breaks down and they have difficulty putting it down on paper. And the third is what we see when spelling is a primary deficit, which often co occurs with dyslexia, but can also appear on its own.
So, theoretically, a child could have beautiful handwriting and still have a writing disorder too.
Yeah, exactly. And a child who writes illegibly might have strong composition skills that are completely buried by the motor and spelling difficulties. The profile matters enormously because the intervention for each one looks completely different. Okay, so what is dysgraphia and what does it actually look like? Let's start with dysgraphia since it's the most commonly named, but probably the most misunderstood. So, Dr. Judy, what is actually happening in the brain?
Well, dysgraphia is a neurologically based difficulty with the physical process of writing. So that's forming letters, maintaining consistency and spacing words, and writing at a effective speed. What's happening underneath is a breakdown in what we call orthographic processing. That's the brain's ability to store and retrieve the visual motor patterns needed to produce the letters automatically. For most of us, because we practice it so much, writing a letter becomes completely automatic. It's almost instantaneous. But for a child with dysgraphia, that automaticity never fully develops. So they're spending so much energy. It requires them effortful, conscious attention every time they're writing a single letter. So think about how long that might take to form a sentence.
And Dr. Judy, that challenges parents quite a bit and their patients. And the cognitive cost of that is enormous.
Enormous, because you're spending so much cognitive resources just producing the letters. That's such a basic type of skill that there's almost nothing left for the content. You still have to do the thinking and the organizing by themes and what you're trying to say, and also utilizing your vocabulary, which is why children with dysgraphia often produce written work that is dramatically shorter and simpler than what they're capable of. And when you ask them questions verbally, they have so many more developed ideas, and you're wondering why I didn't make it on the page. So it's not the limit of their ideas, it's the limit of their processing capacity, because cognitive resources are not infinite. You do get exhausted over time. So as the child is trying to do this, maybe even into the afternoon, this particular issue seems to get worse.
Yeah, after they've been at school all day, they come
Yeah,
home to do homework and they have to sit there.
right.
And it's painful for them and it's painful for the parents. And I think that this is a piece that breaks parents and teachers' hearts when they finally understand it. The child isn't being lazy or careless. They are working at a maximum capacity just to get words onto a page.
Right. And they often can't sustain it, which is why their handwriting also deteriorates across a writing session. Maybe it starts reasonably legible. And then after 10, 20, 30 minutes, it becomes increasingly difficult to read as that cognitive load accumulates.
Mhm. And this is why when I do an evaluation, I always ask parents to bring in their writing samples because you can
Mhm.
see that in real time as well. So here's something that surprises most people, including many educators. Dysgraphia affects not just handwriting, but keyboarding too, because the deficit isn't in the hand, it's in the brain's orthographic processing system. Many children with dysgraphia struggle equally with typing, especially when it comes to speed and automaticity, which means simply that giving a child a laptop is not the same as giving them an intervention. The technology helps access, but it doesn't address the underlying processing deficit. They have trouble learning the letters on the keyboard
Mhm.
to produce the writing that they are trying to convey. So both need to be supported.
Right. So now let's talk about the child whose handwriting is fine or who types adequately, but whose written work still doesn't reflect what they're capable of. So, what's happening there, Dr. Grace?
Well, Dr. Judy, this is a disorder of written expression profile, and it's often the hardest to identify because the mechanics aren't flagging anyone. The breakdown is in the higher order processes, organizing ideas, constructing sentences and paragraphs, maintaining a coherent narrative or argument, using language precisely in written form. These children can talk through an idea brilliantly, but the moment they have to write it down, something collapses.
And the reason for that collapse is fascinating from a neuropsychological standpoint. Speaking and writing are not the same cognitive process. So when we
Mhm.
speak, language flows relatively automatically. Writing requires a simultaneous management of several skills like content, organization, language, mechanics, and working memory, all held in mind at the same time. For children with executive function weaknesses or language processing difficulties, that simultaneous demand is where the system breaks down.
Good points, Dr. Judy. So, this is also the profile most likely to be misread as a motivation problem because the child clearly has the ideas. You can hear them in class, you can hear them at home. So, when the written work doesn't match, adults assume the child didn't try. But trying harder doesn't give you stronger working memory, and it doesn't automatically improve executive functions. It just creates more frustration. So, the right intervention does help. So, Dr. Judy, for the parent or teacher listening right now, what does the path to identification look like and what does support actually involve?
Well, Dr. Gray's identification requires a comprehensive evaluation that looks very specifically at written expression. So, not just as a byproduct of a general cognitive assessment, but as a targeted area of investigation. You want to see assessment of fine motor skills and graphomotor processing for the dysgraphia piece, orthographic processing, and phonological processing for the spelling component, working memory, executive function, and language formulation for the written expression piece. And importantly, a comparison between their verbal output and their written output. That gap is often where the story is. And there are specific neuropsychological tests that looks at language output delivered verbally versus how they communicate ideas when they have to write it down on a page. And that's where you're going to see some differences if a person really is struggling with this.
Mhm. And Dr. Judy, the evaluation needs to include an actual writing sample, timed, spontaneous, and extended, not fill in the blank. A real writing task that shows how the child's system performs under realistic conditions so that they can compose a paragraph or
Mhm.
something to that effect. And a lot of times those components are missing from evaluations.
That's right, because there are some tests that offer that fill in the blank type style where you're just trying to fill in a word with the vocabulary that you know, but there isn't that extensive sort of essay writing component. And some of the tests really focus on that. And also, you need to pick those right subtests if you're the evaluator. So, really letting your evaluator know that this is where you think the struggles are, and asking them are you going to be administering a writing assignment where they're actually going to be writing in prose for a couple of paragraphs, because that's really different from filling in the blank and writing one word at a time.
It's a great point.
And on the intervention side, for dysgraphia, occupational therapy targeting graphomotor skills is often the starting point. Handwriting without tears is one of the most researched explicit handwriting programs. I also love the name. For the written expression piece, self regulated strategy development, or SRSD, has the strongest evidence base. And speech to text technology really is transformative for students whose verbal abilities far exceed their written output.
Mhm. Thanks for bringing that up, Dr. Judy, because that means that they can dictate their thoughts and it will automatically translate into maybe a Word document that they can go back and edit. And once they have the ideas down and it's a little bit more organized, they're able to go into that document and edit it and make it actually measure what they are capable of. So
Right.
accommodations are essential. Extended time for any written task, speech to text technology, like we just talked about, reduced writing demands where the goal is demonstrating knowledge rather than assessing writing, typed rather than handwritten assignments, and graphic organizers and planning scaffolds before writing even begins.
And one thing I really want to make sure parents know about is that these accommodations should not be withheld until a formal diagnosis is in place. It can take sometimes a couple of months or even more than that to get that evaluation done, to have the school and parent meeting. And before then, you can talk to your child's teacher and let them know that you've experienced these difficulties. They may also be the ones telling you about it, and asking them what's reasonable for them to start offering some
Mhm.
informal accommodations in the classroom. So if a child is showing a significant gap already between what they can say and what they can write, that's evidence enough to start giving them some type of academic support. So here's my last question, Dr. Grace. What is the core thing you want everyone listening today to take away from our conversation?
So, for parents, the written page is not an accurate representation of your child's intelligence. If your child can tell you a rich, detailed, complex story and hand in a written assignment that looks like the work of a different child entirely, that gap is a clinical signal, not a character flaw. Trust the gap, get it evaluated, and try to get it evaluated early. And in the meantime, find every way you can to let your child demonstrate what they know without writing being the only route.
And for educators, the child who hands in complete, messy, minimal written work is not showing you their capabilities. They're showing you the cost of a processing system that's under a huge strain. So, the same child who gave you 3 paragraphs of brilliant verbal analysis and class discussion did not all of a sudden lose that knowledge when they picked up a pen or just didn't care. Their knowledge base is still there. The bridge between the brain and the page is what needs that support.
Yes, Dr. Judy. And for teens, if writing has always felt like trying to run in wet concrete, If your ideas are vivid and your voice is strong and the page never shows it, that experience is real and it is neurologically based. You are not a bad writer because you lack discipline or creativity or effort. You may have a brain that needs a different pathway to get what's inside out to the world. Speech to text, dictation using those little dictation machines that we used to have, or into your phone. There's lots of different programs. Structured planning, the right instruction, these are not cheats. They're the tools your brain actually needs. So my takeaway for parents, watch the gap. If what your child says and what your child writes are dramatically different, that gap deserves attention. Don't wait for the written work to get worse before you seek answers. The earlier you understand what's driving the gap, the earlier you can support it. And evidence does show that early intervention is more effective than waiting.
And a reminder for educators, extend the time, offer the technology, and stop requiring handwriting to be the proof of their capacity and effort. A child who dictates a brilliant paragraph is demonstrating exactly as much learning as a child who writes one. So let the work show you what they know, not just what their hands can produce.
Mhm. And I just want to add something to that as well. Sometimes tests, if they're able to respond orally to the prompt, that often can pick up exactly
Mhm.
what they know rather than the struggles that they have with writing. So this week's resource is in the show notes, a parent's guide to writing disorders that covers the 3 profiles, the early signs and what to ask for at evaluation, and the accommodations and interventions that actually make a difference.
If this episode helped you, share it with a parent or teacher who needs to hear it. And send us your questions on social media or in the comments of this podcast. We want to know what you want us to dig into next.
So until next time, every mind deserves to be understood.